The Movie Preview Critic. Informing and entertaining your movie world.
The world will look up and shout, "Save us." And I'll whisper, "No."
So Watchmen looks holy shit awesome. It's gonna fucking rock. Kick some movie ass, right? But why? Why is it gonna be awesome? Is it A, the story's revolutionary? B, it has a complex emotional exploration of characters? C, it's from the director of 300? D, it's based on the most celebrated graphic novel of all time? E, it looks cool? F, great marketing? G, all the above? H, do these questions even matter? My vote is that it does matter why we're so excited for Watchmen. Let's take some time and try to find the movie truth so we can prepare our expectations properly for this highly anticipated would-be blockbuster. Normally, in this part of the preview review, this is where I put the story in chronological order based on the parts revealed in the preview. But we can't do that because of warning sign number 1. The preview reveals no story. Now hold on, I'm not bashing the movie as much as I am the marketing. So, Watchmen watchers, calm down. And after you do that, you've got to admit the preview doesn't tell us anything about what to expect in terms of an Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 story structure. To compare, here's the structure of some other superhero comic book adaptation movies based on the previews. In Spider-Man, nerdy Peter Parker likes Mary Jane, and he's a loser until a spider bites him. Now he's got powers and confidence, so he goes after the girl and at the same time starts saving citizens from danger, especially from the Green Goblin, who's established as the main opponent. In the X-Men, we learn there are mutants among us, some which are good, some which are not so good, and humans are afraid of both. Xavier and his group want peace. Magneto and his gang are preparing for a war. Let the superpower action begin. The most recent and the highest grossing movie based on a comic book, The Dark Knight, which reveals the main character hero Batman, his opponent the amazingly twisted Joker, and the battle between chaos and order, which takes place in Gotham City with the population as pawns. I'm using movies based on comics for an important reason, because Watchmen is not like other comics. So it's not going to be like other comic book based movies. And here we have to mention warning sign number 2. The preview reveals no characters. Now you're probably saying, dude, we get images of all the main characters, but they don't mention their names or reveal their personalities. The Dark Knight did that with the Joker, or X-Men with Wolverine, or Spider-Man with Peter Parker. And that's because of warning sign number 3. The preview reveals only genre. That's the main element being used here to get us excited. It's a superhero movie, and that means costumes, action, and effects, which ties into warning sign number 7. The preview whores out from the director of. In this case, an egotistical version of that from the visionary director of. In this case, 300. Using the word visionary is making a huge claim. So is Zack Snyder worthy of this? Stanley Kubrick after 2001 can be considered visionary. George Lucas after Star Wars, visionary. The Wachowski brothers after The Matrix, visionary. Zack Snyder after 300, I'm gonna have to agree. It's definitely a visionary movie. So even though it sounds like this tagline is a big ego stroke job, it's actually well deserved. So why is from the director of a warning sign? Because sometimes it could be a way of distracting from the quality of the movie and tying it back to another better movie the director made earlier. Here it's supposed to tell us that the visuals of this one will be just as visionary as those in 300. And they actually seem like they will be. The visuals look holy f***ing awesome. So let's geek out here for a minute and compare the look of the movie with the look of the comic. As we can see, the movie is trying to be extremely faithful and loyal to the comic, at least visually, which is great. But the visual style is not the reason Watchmen is, as the preview advertises, the most celebrated graphic novel of all time. Yes, the look is definitely memorable and it stands out, but more importantly is the content. The characters' ideas, themes, metaphors, and basically the level of story depth. Watchmen is f***ing deep. This preview doesn't worry me because there's no story or characters revealed. It worries me because it's not giving us, the audience, enough credit. Because the truth is that from a story point of view, Watchmen is not fast-paced. It's not as exciting and fast-paced as Spider-Man, The Dark Knight, or the X-Men. But for some reason, it's being advertised that way. Watchmen is not an action movie. It's a murder mystery. It's basically a whodunit. A Philip Marlowe, Raymond Chandler, 1940s, Dashiell Hammett, Maltese Falcon, Humphrey Bogart, Jack Nicholson, Chinatown-style, hard-boiled, noir detective story. The visuals here make it seem like it's all kicking ass and chewing bubblegum, when it's really a character-based exploration, deconstruction, and redefinition of the superhero genre and the medium of comics, as well as a comment on the social and political climate of the mid-1980s, as well as analyzing the nature of being human. Do the filmmakers and or the studio think we won't be able to understand the story? Or does the marketing team think it's too boring to make us interested? Well, let's find out, because it's time to reveal the story based on the preview. Edward Blake, also known as Masked Vigilante the Comedian, is murdered. He was part of a group known as the Crime Busters years before. All the members gather for Blake's funeral, where this dude, known as Rorschach, starts wondering about who could have killed Blake. He starts to believe someone is trying to kill all the remaining superheroes. That's Act 1, the setup. We meet the Night Owl, the Silk Spectre, Ozymandias, and John Osterman, who becomes the only crime buster with real superpowers after he's changed to Dr. Manhattan. Ozymandias is considered the smartest man alive, so you could say that is a super ability. But other than that, they're just regular, emotionally confused people that eat, piss, love, and hate like the rest of us. The rest of the story is unclear based on the preview, unless you've read the comic, and that's the battle here for the marketing. Do you appeal to the fans of the graphic novel, or do you approach it as if no one's ever seen or heard of this? It seems like the style of the preview is doing neither, because if you're a die-hard Watchmen fan, you know the story, so why hold it back? And if you've never heard of it, why not try to reveal some of it so audiences know what they're getting themselves into? It's like the ads are appealing to Geek Nation by showing how close the comic came to the imagery, and that it's faithful and respectful, and that's supposed to get their trust, while exciting potential audiences at the same time. But if you watch the preview from the perspective of someone who doesn't know shit about Watchmen or comics, it's just like, what the f*** is this about? It definitely looks cool, and it's nice to see the guy from 300 making another movie, but is this just going to be CGI porn? Just special effects money shot after money shot? Or is the core of the Watchmen novel going to be explored? The look of the characters and the visuals are the least important element of why Watchmen is the most celebrated graphic novel of all time. It's as if the marketing team believes the content is too smart for everyone, so they decided to sell the flash and sizzle to trance us and our box office dollars into the theaters. To really understand why Watchmen became Watchmen, and why it's awesome that this has finally made it to the big screen, we have to understand what the comic book world was like before Watchmen changed things forever in 1986. When it announced itself to the comic world with a sonic boom scream, it wasn't just trying to get attention and show off. It was trying to evolve an underappreciated art form. Before Watchmen, comics had been going through a delayed Peter Pan, I don't want to grow up puberty for about 30 years. Comics began to mature with the Silver Age, which lasted from the late 50s and into the late 60s or early 70s. Now, I'm not going to pretend I'm some comic book historian, but from what I understand, comics as we know them today really took shape during this period. This is where you get all the superheroes that we all know and love today, like Spider-Man, Iron Man, and the X-Men. More importantly, this is where you get comics exploring characters in a deeper way. Heroes begin to act human here. They're not perfect two-dimensional fantasies that are always doing the right thing. Sort of how we imagine our parents when we're 5 years old. From the early 70s begins the Bronze Age. And while it's the same superheroes continuing on, they're getting a little darker, reflecting the real world for what it is. So you have stories dealing with racism, characters being killed off, and even characters using drugs. Check this comic cover out. Yeah, superheroes waged war on drugs way before Nancy Reagan told us all just to say no back in the 80s. The Bronze Age of comics was pretty daring, and it became the caterpillar that developed in the cocoon into the butterfly that was to take flight in the mid-80s with two comics. Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, and Allan Moore's Watchmen. This started the Modern Age, or the Dark Age, or if you want to stick with metals, the Iron Age. That's where we are today, where superheroes aren't perfect at all. At times, they're just as demented and psychologically confused as the villains and criminals that they face. Here, the line between black and white isn't gray. It's every color from hooker red to pimp slap black and blue to gonorrhea green to alcoholic heroin homeless man brownish rotted teeth yellow. These comics were written with pens dipped in fear and colored with emotions of anxiety and helplessness. For the first time, it really began to feel like our heroes couldn't fix any problems because they couldn't even fix their own. And they weren't even heroes. They were just people acting in extreme, desperate ways. This was all just a reflection of reality. The early to mid-80s were a tense time, mainly because of the Cold War. There was definitely this feeling of danger, very close to what we have today with the constant threat of terrorism, but it just seemed larger and more black and white, good versus evil. It was Russia versus America, communism versus capitalism, and both sides had enough nuclear bombs to destroy the planet 100 times over. It had pretty much been like this since the 1950s with the whole duck and cover mentality, but by the time the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, America and pretty much the entire free world had lived in a flight or fight stressed out state for 40 years. Tensions were at their highest during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, and for some reason felt high again in the mid-80s. You can see this in movies like War Games, The Day After, Miracle Mile, and even Superman had to deal with this nuclear threat in his last original 80s cinematic adventure, The Quest for Peace. Back then, it really felt like any day some dude was gonna press the red button and it would be game over for humanity. Thanks for playing, come again. All of this comes together and gets interpreted by art. Usually the established TV shows or filmmakers keep doing the type of stories that have been proven to make money. That's why it takes the outside of the loop artist, the one who's thinking outside of the box, hearing, sensing, and picking up on what everyone is feeling and thinking but not saying. It's up to this artist to find an entertaining, powerful way for us to hear the message. And that's what comic books had always been, a place where the imagination could run wild, a place where fantasies could take form, a place where the truth of the current moment could live. It was a moment that had people wanting to believe in leaders again, but couldn't help doubting their integrity and intentions. It was a time when the world seemed doomed, and to be hopeful was to be stupid and naive. And in general, it really seemed like there were no heroes, just humans f***ing everything up. Enter Allan Moore, the artist that absorbs this zeitgeist like a sham wow. Yes, that sham wow. He senses this cultural, psychological, political, and archetypical perception seeping in the clouds, waiting for the smallest thunderclap to start everything storming down, drowning us in our own karmic excrement. Taking this along with Dave Gibbons, he pushes the comic book world into adulthood, like mom closing the car door sending us off to our first day of school, or dad taking the training wheels off of our bike. The arrested development of a 30-year puberty is over. It's a nuclear bomb of creativity and impatience. It destroys the outdated devices of the superhero story and rebuilds it, pointing it in a new direction and demanding the comic book morph itself into a shape capable of containing it. It's the genre life cycle coming to an end and the rejuvenation of comics. Really quickly, let's review this life cycle. Step 1. Something new is introduced. It's fresh, different, exciting, and we want more of it. So, we get Step 2. Copies and clones are made over and over to fulfill demand. This leads to Step 3. Burnout. We get tired of the thing we wanted more of, like a kid at midnight on Halloween in a sugar coma. We're sick of it, so it's time to go to Step 4. Reinvention or irrelevancy. Either you find a way to go back to Step 1 by making some changes, or you fade away because people have evolved, times have changed, and this genre doesn't relate anymore. As for comics, they went through this process a few times: the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, and Modern Age. So for the last 22 years, we've been living in the age Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns ignited. They didn't create it, they just made the rest of us realize it was here. These two comics were the matches the zeitgeist needed for combustion. Most of us tend to live our lives as if the past is the present and that the future is in the distance. But it's the artist that shows us, that helps us recognize the past is gone, the future doesn't exist. What is the present. And it's the artist that says, this is what it looks, tastes, smells, sounds, and feels like. Allegory, metaphor, symbolism, Watchmen has it all, and challenges readers to recognize their world, reality, and themselves in its structure, story, and characters. It actually gives the audience credit for being able to think, but that was in 1986. Today, in a world where TV shows ask us if we're smarter than a 5th grader, Watchmen doesn't give a If we want to read it, we have to bring ourselves up to its level. It doesn't compromise itself for the sake of lowest common denominator's would-be monetary contribution to its final profit. So let's review why Watchmen is such a big deal. First, it makes superheroes real people. It gives them inner struggles, emotional problems, and most importantly, it blurs the line between hero and criminal. Today, this seems like an old idea, but back then, it rarely happened. Second, it doesn't have a supervillain main opponent throughout the whole story that's active. Only in the end do we discover who was behind the superhero killing plot. Third, the structure. On the first level, it's a story about vigilante crime fighters trying to find out who's killing quote-unquote superheroes. On the second level, there is the backstories in flashback style of each of the main characters. On the third level, there's an allegory pirate story, Tales of the Black Freighter. On a fourth level, there's these sort of bonus supplements to each chapter that make the universe of the Watchmen seem all the more real, like the autobiography of the original Night Owl, Hollis Mason, titled Under the Hood. Then you get Rorschach's case file, and then there's newspaper articles and interviews with the various heroes. Usually in the comic book world, this is where a letters section would be placed, and that would sort of break the fourth wall, having fans write in. Here, the book is made up of material from its own universe, keeping it self-contained. Fourth, is deep. It sets the story in the present Cold War world on the verge of self-destruction and allows the characters to explore it, which leads to making its ultimate point: who watches the Watchmen? The Watchmen being our leaders. Within the universe of Watchmen, Richard Nixon is still president, and it could be said that with Watergate and his resignation, he was the one who created this mass doubt in our leaders. He is a real Watchman, a person we the people elect to watch over us. Same thing could be said for the leaders of Russia at that time and all over the world. If we the people elect the few to watch over the many, who's watching over them? How far will they go to make sure the world holds itself together? Which leads maybe to the ultimate question of any leader: are they motivated by the greater good or their own personal gain? Watchmen also has chapter titles with added meaning and quotes at the end of these chapters that reflect the meaning within each installment. Allan Moore has been quoted as saying that he wanted to create a superhero equivalent of Moby Dick, a work that had some weight to it. Fifth, it challenged the limits of comic books to become more than they had been. Again, I'm not a comic book historian, but I guess it was a big deal for it to have a uniform 9-page layout throughout. And in combining the first 4 reasons why Watchmen is a big deal, it proved that comics could be something more than the wish fulfillment fantasies of 10-year-olds. It could be a place to explore our humanity in all its beauty and ugliness in an imaginative, emotional, and exciting way. All of this gave the medium a new life and energy. As is the case with any genre and or medium reaching the end of its cycle, the choice is either parody or rejuvenation. And it's funny, because Allan Moore has mentioned that part of the inspiration for Watchmen was a Mad Magazine parody titled Super Duper Man, except that he wanted to do a serious, dramatic version of that sort of turning the genre on its head parody. And that's an important point. It's serious. The Watchmen is dramatic. It's not a spoof. It knows that the superhero formula in comics is old and repetitive, but it's not choosing the road of parody. It's redefining the conventions that are tired and creating something new, but keeping it serious. And this leads to something that makes me a little worried, because it's been reported that Zack Snyder designed the Ozymandias costume in a sort of homage to the rubber nipple absurdity of Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. Which brings up the question, why? Watchmen is not a spoof. While it references the past concepts of superheroes, it's not intended to be the scary movie, disaster movie of the comic book world. All of this combined is why Watchmen has been in a developmental purgatory. It's been waiting for the technology of filmmaking to catch up to its vision, waiting for the tone of our culture to catch up with its attitude, and waiting for a filmmaker who can see it for what it is and translate it from one medium to the other with as much integrity as possible. Has Zack Snyder done it? To find the answer of that question, let's see what it means to adapt another medium into a movie. Let's think of story as something that exists in this invisible place. It has no form. Now, to bring it into this world, to give it form, we have different mediums through which it can be channeled. You have theater, radio, the novel, the poem, then there's television and movies, and comic books, to name the most popular ones. Each medium has its own strengths. Let's compare 2 of these. First, theater. When you see a play or a musical, how do you experience it? With your eyes and ears. But because you can be seated in the first row or the back row, the visuals aren't the main attraction here. For everyone in attendance to get the same experience, the dialogue is the most important aspect of this medium, which means your hearing is. When you look at movies, Dialogue is the least important part because you have close-ups of the actor's face, their eyes, a glance, the way they hold someone's hand, or if they're sweating or twitching. All of this is possible because of the camera, and no matter where you sit in the theater, you see the same details. So in this medium, the eyes experience everything. So these two have different strengths, and story is going to be translated differently through each of them. Sort of like if you have a Word document and you try to make it into a spreadsheet document. Importing it into that spreadsheet program will take the information and translate it into a language and into a format that makes sense to it and its rules and laws. That's how different mediums translate story. And that's why adapting a novel or a play or a comic into a movie takes skills, patience, and understanding. And that's why Watchmen's been hanging in development since 1986. Over the years, there were different writers and directors trying to tackle the project, maybe the wisest of which was Terry Gilliam, the ex-Monty Python member turned director. If you're a fan of Brazil, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, and 12 Monkeys, then you're a Terry Gilliam fan. About the idea of making Watchmen into a movie, he said, "Reducing the story to a 2.5-hour film seemed to me to take away the essence of what Watchmen is about." He then proposed that it be made into a 5-hour TV miniseries. This is an awesome suggestion. So let's talk about why it's better suited as a multi-part story than one 2.5-hour movie. This goes back to the point about each medium having its own strength. Comic books in general have a limited amount of page space to work with, and they're designed to be serial, either weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. In some cases like Watchmen, they're a limited series with a set amount of issues. In 1986, Watchmen was a 12-issue monthly limited series. Then within the pages there's a lot of freedom. You can have one page be a large image, capturing just one moment of the story. You can have it be divided into 3 parts, or 6, or 10, covering one quick moment, or 3 years of time. These pages can handle whatever challenge the imagination presents. But the images are frozen. Like a novel, it can be narrative and have dialogue, and visually the style of illustration can differ to reflect the mood, tone, and themes of the story. It can be black and white, color, hypercolor, surreal, whatever the artist can imagine. Most importantly, in terms of story unfolding in a comic, it can take its time. It's not moving at 24 frames per second. In a theater that the audience member has rented out for 2 hours with their admission fee so they can experience the story in a set amount of time. A comic is purchased and flipped through. The reader can stay on the first page for hours admiring the artistry, looking for clues within the still frame, which, because of its limit of frozen time, has to be arranged in such a way to communicate maximum story and character and information. It can take 20 minutes to read or 2 months, and that reading could take place on a bus, in a bathroom, or by the fire on a rainy day with a cup of coffee. So let's pretend we're Zack Snyder and we get the call. The job to adapt Watchmen is ours. Great, but oh shit, where do we start? First, let's figure out the strengths of the film medium. Well, the most obvious one is that it's moving pictures, 24 frames a second. It's three-dimensional, whether it's animated or CG or live action. Then there's sound. We can hear everything, from dialogue to traffic. The sound of a match lighting can communicate story information and reveal character. It's also real time. Whether a scene takes place in the past, present, or future, we the audience are always in the moment of the moment. Because of this, we experience story like in no other medium. All of our senses are submerged in the movie environment. The one major challenge here is time. The movie can be like 88 Minutes or Benjamin Button or Run Lola Run. We can experience 90 minutes in 90 minutes, 60 years in 3 hours, or the same 20 minutes 3 times within 80 minutes. But one rule holds pretty true. A movie, until recently with DVD and portable viewing devices, is released in a theater in order to gather in box office, which means people come together in one place, sit down, watch it, get up, and leave, which means it has to start and end in a reasonable amount of time. On average, that time is 2 hours. Sometimes it could be 3 hours or 80 minutes, but overall, a movie has to tell its story quickly, unlike, let's say, a novel, which can be 100 pages, 300, or 1,000. And in general, a movie has to feel like it's always moving forward, especially a H-Wood-produced film, and most definitely a hugely expensively advertised would-be blockbuster. The story should be like a train. Once it gets on the tracks, it tells us who's on it and what the destination is, and it better keep moving forward and never look back. And that's the first problem with adapting Watchmen into a movie. The story is all over the place. It moves forward, then back, then into the future, Then way into the past, it stops to develop the characters through backstory, where in a movie, only the present moment matters. That's because in the comic book medium, that works great, but in a movie where people are watching it in a theater just looking for a reason to be distracted and bored, flashing back or flashing forward can be as disruptive as changing the channel. This is where compromise starts to happen. Because each medium has its own strengths, it's almost impossible to exactly translate it from one to the other. For example, take a look at this moment in the preview. This has been changed. In the novel, only Rorschach and Night Owl are in this scene. Silk is with another character, and they show up a bit after this moment. But because the story has to fit into a 2.5 hour structure, scenes have to be combined, with the dramatic impact being the important factor, and not the exact way that it happens in the source material. And because it's a movie, the more drama, the better. So if adding more characters to a scene heightens that drama, and in this case also condenses the story, then that's what has to be done, especially in the case of an epic story like this one. That's the main issue with Watchmen. It's a 12-part story, where each part focuses on different characters in the present and past, where the so-called main story about Rorschach searching for the comedian's killer and uncovering the superhero assassin conspiracy is a small thread through each issue. That's the exact thread American movie making wants to follow, this story about a main character seeking a goal, fighting off an opponent. But that's not what makes Watchmen so revolutionary. If a filmmaker is obeying the rules of American mainstream H-Wood hit making, they learn that backstory is bullshit. Flashbacks stop the forward momentum of a story dead, and characters talking about what was and what will be is exposition. In an American mainstream movie, we want drama. Two characters or more fighting for something until they get it, scene after scene after scene, with occasional moments to talk about their feelings, usually while they're still fighting for something. Watchmen doesn't do that. And that's why we love it. That's why it rules. And that's why it's such a pain in the ass to adapt into a movie. Because it violates the rules of H-Wood blockbuster filmmaking. For example, in The Dark Knight, Batman has to stop the Joker from destroying Gotham in every scene. He's pursuing his goal once the pieces are in place. That's not Watchmen. Yes, it moves forward, but it takes interesting, unpredictable detours that on the big screen might seem distracting. And that's because it was created to fit the form of 12 monthly issues, not a 2-hour movie. That's why Terry Gilliam's suggestion about a miniseries makes the most sense, because you could do it justice and you wouldn't have to amputate that many limbs. The best example of what Watchmen might look like on TV is Lost, especially the first 3 seasons. Series co-creator Damon Lindelof has said that Watchmen had a huge influence on the structure of the show, especially the overall style of the episodes, which is basically telling 2 stories simultaneously, the past and the present. Allan Moore said that originally he had enough story only for 6 issues, but because he had a contract that said he had to deliver 12, the solution he came up with was origin stories for the characters. This is the same trick Lost used in its early seasons, when the show didn't have a set end date. So with a rough idea of a main story, which is, what the hell is this island, the writers used the Watchmen solution, which made the episodes contain half the amount of the main story info they normally would, thereby allowing them to stay on track with their superstructure series story points. Like season 1 ends here, by the middle of season 2 this'll happen, and season 3 will start here, and on and on. In filmmaking, the origin stories are material for actors. They need to know their character's history so they can bring some depth to their present moment and on-screen struggles. In a mainstream movie, we see the tip of this character iceberg, the who they are now part of them. And the backstories, the who they were part, are submerged beneath the surface only to emerge as a result of present moment dramatic conflict. That's the compromise movies demand if stories are going to be told in this medium. But since Watchmen has a legion of hardcore fans, H-Wood rules for the blockbuster mainstream movies will be waived, because in this case it's more important to do it for the fans instead of the accountants. The best choice might have been to make a trilogy, 3 2-hour movies, or if that was too much, then at least 2 3-hour movies. In the movie world, everything begins with the script, and in general, a properly formatted screenplay page translates to the screen at 1 page per minute. Watchmen is 12 chapters. each averaging about 30 pages, which equals 360 pages. Now that's not screenplay format, so it could be longer or shorter than that, but let's just use that number. Watchmen is 360 pages / minutes, which equals 6 hours. By now, we've all heard that the original cut of this movie was like 3.5 hours, and it's been reduced to somewhere around 2.5 hours, which is 150 minutes, or 150 pages, which means if we go by non-script formatted page counts, there's 210 pages missing from the final version, and even the 3.5 hour version would equal 210 pages, which would be missing 150 pages. But at this point, we happen to know that the comic within a comic story, Tales of the Black Freighter, which take place in Watchmen chapters 3, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, has been made into an animated short running about 20 minutes, starring Gerard Butler, yes, King Leonidas. It's not going to be part of the movie, and instead will be released as a DVD the week Watchmen hits theaters. So now that's about 130 pages or minutes left to be accounted for. Also filmed but edited out from the movie is the excerpt from Hollis Mason's autobiography Under the Hood, which is his story of becoming the original Night Owl. In the novel, this is at the end of each of the first 3 chapters, and it totals about 14 pages. So that leaves us about 116 pages or minutes unaccounted for. And if that wasn't enough, rumor is the original ending has been changed. What the f***? The whole point of the story is reflected in the ending. Without the ending, the spirit of everything leading up to it is dead. And that spirit is what we need in our movie version of Watchmen at this time. When it showed up on the comic book school playground, announcing itself as the toughest kid on the block, a lot of superheroes had been around for a while. Spider-Man, Iron Man, Batman, Superman, X-Men, pretty much all the major characters that survived till this day. And the same case is true in the superhero movie school playground. Over the last 10 years, all these classic characters have been adapted into movies. Now, it's time for Watchmen to do its job one more time on the main stage, where pop culture can truly appreciate it, the movie theater screen. In 1986, it was created because artists wanted to say something about humanity, superheroes, and the art form. Today, it's being made into a movie because adapting comics is highly profitable, and it's one of the last major well-known comics to get big screen treatment. So because money is the motive and not artistic integrity, there's a danger here that, like Dr. Manhattan, its atoms will be rearranged and its humanity will be made cold or stripped away. With a $120 million budget, there's a lot of interest in making this a success and not necessarily a geek boy's wet dream come true. The man with our hopes in his directorial hands is Zack Snyder. Film is the most collaborative of all the arts. At least with a novel, poem, or song, you can write it on your own. But a film has a cast of hundreds or even thousands behind the scenes. That's why it takes vision, the eye of the camera, to filter these other ideas into one final achievement. And the eye that looks through the camera belongs to the director, who has the ultimate final vision. Here, as mentioned, it's Zack Snyder, who of course, as the preview whores out, is the director of 300. His only other previous film was the Dawn of the Dead remake, which is actually one of the best horror remakes of the last 5 years. He's obviously got a great eye for visuals, but for Watchmen, the important factor is the characters, the emotions, and the themes. One of the major joys of the original Dawn of the Dead from 1978 is the satire and social commentary about consumer culture. Back in the 70s, huge shopping malls became popular, and George Romero was poking fun at consumers becoming materialistic zombies. And it was a great added element to the story. Go to the local mall today and you'll see everyone still doing the slow zombie mall walk. While the remake had the fast zombies and a great visual look, it downplayed this satire. 300 did a nicer job of balancing the look with the meaning. The whole theme of honor, standing up for, and willingness to die for your country, way of life, family, and friends is definitely a strong part of the movie. And of course, every shot looks like a Rembrandt painting. Watchmen is even more thematically dense than 300, and the challenge for Zack Snyder will be leaving his safe zone, which is his visual mastery, and bringing the message of Watchmen to the forefront. I'm also feeling pretty good that Zack has said that Taxi Driver and Seven are movies he had in mind when creating a mood and feel for the world of Watchmen. One other sign of hope is that non-A-list actors have been hired. Normally this can lead to warning sign number 4, no-name actors, which could mean the acting, usually because the studio wants to keep the budget low to maximize potential profit. but in this case, hiring no-name or sort of heard of actors that normally have co-starring roles really benefits the story. During its long developmental history, Watchmen had many A-listers attached, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was set to play Dr. Manhattan, or at one time, Joaquin Phoenix, who was under consideration for the same role, though today it looks like he's gearing up for a starring role in an Allan Moore biopic. Other stars like Sigourney Weaver, Daniel James Bond Craig, and Jude Law were all in talks to star in the movie at some point in its developmental history. Not having a well-known name and face doesn't distract from the character. It brings you into the story on a deeper level. You don't have that subconscious voice in your head saying, "That's Tom Cruise playing Ozymandias." So we have to give Zack Snyder credit for letting the story do the work instead of using star power to attract the audience. So because I really respect that, there will be no review of who the actors are here. Let's just keep them hidden behind the characters they're bringing to life, because that's what we finally have, Watchmen in live action. I'm as excited as you are, but as we've been discussing here, it's not going to be everything we wished it could have been. So let's get ourselves ready by reviewing what to expect when we walk into the theater. First, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5 to 2 hours and 45 minutes long, which has to be a little disappointing because there's at least 6 hours of material in the graphic novel. Second, this means that the best movie version of the graphic novel medium has been made. Again, if the studio and filmmakers really wanted to answer fanboy wishes, they would have either made a trilogy of 3 2-hour movies, each made up of 4 chapters, or maybe 2 3-hour movies, each made up of 6 chapters. Or, if they really wanted to stay as faithful as possible, make it a 6-episode TV miniseries, each made up of 2 chapters. But then again, if they really wanted to geek out and just mirror the comic, how about a 12-part TV miniseries? But again, let's not live in the world of what if. We have what is, which is the best movie medium version of what we could have hoped for. Third, it's not going to be an action-packed superhero power fight fest. Watchmen is much more of a 1940s hard-boiled detective story. So be ready for an unraveling mystery, not a shoot-'em-up thrill ride. Even though some moments have been juiced up with dramatic steroids for a little more excitement. For example, in the book, I won't say where, there's a jailbreak, and Silk Spectre and Night Owl move through the jail, but don't really have to fight any prisoners or guards because they've been knocked out already. Here, in the preview, they're doing a lot of kung fuing because it makes everything seem more exciting. Even though in the comic, the reason they don't have to fight anyone is great, namely because someone else has taken care of the opposition, making it have more impact and meaning for that character, who we're not going to name. The new added fight takes away that meaning and replaces it with momentary sizzle that's going to fade away. Fourth, it's set in an alternate 1980s where the Cold War tension of East and West are at an all-time high. The threat of nuclear war is everywhere, and Nixon is president. This will also allow for commentary on our current terror-filled world without hitting us over the head about it. Fifth, it's character-based and focused. What makes the graphic novel stand out is the depth of its heroes. This is done with flashbacks and backstory, so expect this to happen. Sixth, these are not superheroes. Other than Dr. Manhattan, no one has any crazy powers. Again, Ozymandias is the smartest man alive, but everyone else bleeds, sweats, and shits. 7. It's smarter than a 5th grader and believes you are too. It doesn't dumb itself down, and it raises us up to its level. Let's hope all the ideas that made us say holy shit when we were reading this story give us the same reaction while we're watching it. Because on March 6th, the answer to the question, who watches The Watchmen, will be audiences that want movies to go beyond what they currently are. The movie preview critic rates Watchmen worthy of big screen viewing. While it's not going to be a perfect adaptation, it's going to be as good as it can get for a 2-hour and 40-minute version of a 360-page work of comic art. Definitely see it at regular price in a packed theater filled with fans who have been anticipating it for over 20 years. It's definitely rated holy shit, that looks f***ing awesome. It might just be the ultimate bros night out at the movies. This is absolutely for you if you're a comic book adaptation lover, and if you're the next step up from a comic book adaptation lover, which would be the fanboy, this is an absolute requirement. I'm hoping that despite the CGI action-loaded preview, that this adaptation carries over the qualities that made Watchmen a pusher of boundaries. In this case, hopefully, of the the comic book movie. If it manages to do that, it may just have the power to inspire. And even though it's set in an alternate 1986, its content should still be socially relevant, especially since it deals with societal tensions resulting from war, uncertainty, and shaky economics, which seems eerily close to our 2009 reality. Since Zack Snyder's the director, that should definitely make your day, especially because you love computer-generated images, as well as the superhero element of the story, and you gotta admit, this seems pretty epic. There's also a nostalgia element for those who remember the comic when it came out, and it will probably be an automatic childhood memory for younger audience members. Finally, it definitely has a pre-existing fan base, which guarantees box office. Now, it's time for Watchmen's place in movie history! This is kind of tricky because there's really nothing like it. If we compare it to comic book adaptations and superhero-style CGI movies, it should be better than Spider-Man 3, X-Men 1 and 3, The Matrix 2 and 3, Batman, Batman Returns, Forever, Batman and Robin, as well as all the Superman movies, Ghost Rider, Punisher, Daredevil, Elektra, Spawn, and pretty much any of the other comic book adaptations that have come out over the last 10 years, except for X-Men 2, Spider-Man 2, Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and The Matrix. In terms of graphic novels, it'll be better than The Spirit and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and might just be better than 300 in terms of the story, but maybe not visually. Then when it comes to the complete package, it's going to be pretty close to see if it can edge out V for Vendetta and Sin City. Now, let's determine Watchmen's contribution to cinema. It's definitely a positive one. It pushes the boundaries of accepted blockbuster filmmaking by having respect for its source material while obviously trying to profit from it. It provides great never-before-seen visuals, and it actually respects the audience and fans by trying to make the best product possible, though by the previews it looks like H-Wood is afraid to advertise it honestly. Is everyone wondering how much money it's going to make? Let's ask the box office psychic. Since these preview reviews come out early, it's time to see if we can predict the box office numbers. Because it has a huge fan base and has been marketed to the max, look for it to make somewhere between 60 and 70 million opening weekend, with a final total in the US around the $200 to $250 million mark. Most likely, audience members who thought this was going to be an awesome action superhero pow zap smash comic book movie will be disappointed and not go back again. But the fanboys will appreciate Zack Snyder's respect for the material and his faithful adaptation, and will probably go back a few more times. In its second week, expect it to make about 40 million. In its third, somewhere around 25, and it'll end the month off making around 15 million. It should clean up in March because there's really no competition till April when Dragon Ball, Fast and the Furious, and Hannah Montana take over. So until next time, choose your movies wisely, and as always,
Long live good movies!